Hello and welcome to Comforting Heart Conversations. Thank you so much for joining us today, and also thank you to our guest, Dr. Anoop Kumar. Dr. Kumar is a board-certified emergency physician practicing in the Washington, D.C. area, and he completed an international master's in health leadership program, earning a master's degree in management from McGill University, close to me in Montreal. As a child, Anoop was surrounded by the teachings of Eastern philosophy, and he came to recognize a common message woven through philosophy, science, and spirituality, a practical message of well-being cloaked in esoteric language. His passion is translating this message into modern applications, which of course he's a physician, so I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. And he joins us now to have a conversation about his beliefs and how they merge with his position as being an emergency room physician. So thanks so much. And first I'd like to congratulate you on your book, Michelangelo's Medicine. Thank
you. Thank you.
Yeah, that was a pretty profound way of looking at it. And my sister is actually a physician, and she's more in radiology, so quite a difference with being actually face to face with patients. But I really wanted to understand more about that interaction and also beliefs, because I also too share your passion for spirituality. So I found Michela's medicine to be something that was very enlightening to me. As a result, if it's okay with you, I'd like to start off with a quote from your book.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Just as well-being is often interpreted as a backdrop of disease, it is hard to talk about life without mentioning death. Oddly, life and death seem to be opposites, yet they are partners. They are constantly occurring processes happening in all levels of the body. So how simple and so profound. I love how you position death as a process and not an event, which many see it as an event. So would love to hear your thoughts a little bit more on that.
Sure. The example I use in the book is of the skin. And looking at the skin really helps us understand this polarity between birth and death. I would add that I see birth and death as two opposites of a pole, right? As polar opposites. Life itself, for me, is not opposed to death. So to me, death cannot end life. Life is not limited to birth and death, but birth and death are processes of life. So let's take a look at the skin. If you look at the skin, the outermost layer of our skin, the outermost layer of the epidermis, is dead. The cells are dead skin cells. In fact, if you just rub your forearms, there are numerous cells just falling off, innumerable cells just falling off, dead cells. You don't want to see them. They're all over the floor, right?
Yes.
If you look at the deepest layers of the skin, they're continuously regenerating. Birth is happening at the deepest layers of the skin cells. So the deepest layer is birth. As they move up towards the outer surface of the skin, they're maturing. You might say they're going through adolescence and middle age and an elder level of living, or an elder age. And then the topmost level, they're dead. Now, this is the skin, but the skin as a whole is still life, is still a process of life. So that life contains both these processes of birth, regeneration, growth, maturation, decay, and death. And so I see it the same way for a human being. This is obviously not coming from my medical training. It's not what we were taught in medical school, but the way I see it, a human being goes through a process of birth, growth, maturation, decay, death. And that is a part of what it means to be a human being. And yet it's not all of it. There's more to being human than one lifetime and one body.
Oh, that's perfect. That's perfect. It's interesting that you pose it as, I love the skin as a vehicle to describe that. One of the things that I kind of came across, like when I was with my dad and he was dying, there was a lot of literature that they gave you at the hospice. And one of the things that really kind of started me thinking was an analogy about how much death is also like birth. And it's a continuum, right? It's not a this and it's that, but so much like birth, you're waiting for that moment. You don't really kind of know when it's going to happen and what the outcome is. And, it gets really kind of, intense at the end and maybe not for everybody, but, surely it does on a regular normal birth, but the outcome is the same, right? It's a birth of a soul into a new reality. And so I think that's kind of interesting that we actually can apply that very physically as well.
Yes, and the reason that birth and death look so different, to follow up on exactly what you said, is that after birth, we recognize what's happening, which is what we call a lifetime.
Oh,
After
cool.
death, there's no recognition. And so we say that we use two different words completely. But in fact, if we just use the word transition for both, if we take out birth and death and replace them with their more fundamental meaning, which is a transition, we all recognize birth as a transition. Whether we say it's a transition from nothing or I don't know what into a form as a body, into a lifetime, or whether we say something that's more subtle, regardless, everyone recognizes that birth is a transition. Similarly, everyone recognizes that death is a transition, either from form into nothing or oblivion, what somebody would say, or some people would say heaven or some other dimensions. Some people would say something more subtle. Whatever it might be, everyone recognizes death as a transition. So birth and death are transitions. The different stories we tell about birth and death are because the level of recognition is different regarding what happens before and after those transitions.
Yeah, so true. And I think, for people that don't have a spiritual grounding, right, so that they may not understand or don't, have a belief system in place about that, I still believe the word transition applies, right? Because it's your life with this person in your life, and then your life after that person is no longer in your life. And so there's still a transition, and it still is very much in that birth-death continuum of transition. So I totally agree.
Right. So the transition is for the person who's dying, but it's also for all the people they're connected with, or they're also transitioning during that lifetime in some way.
Right. So I've been to the ER many times, with me and the kids and the family and all that. Nothing has ever, only with my dad had it ended in something that was the diagnosis that it was the beginning of the end for him. So I imagine as an ER physician, you're faced with that way more than the one time that I was. What are some of your experiences with that from that perspective? I mean, help me understand that.
One of the experiences I wrote about in the book right at the beginning is, and this is something that happens not uncommonly in the emergency department, is when a person is in the throes of a life-threatening illness and they now have to come to terms with that decision as to what we do next. How far do we go? What measures do we take? What do I actually want done to my body? Here I might be 60, 70, 80, 90 years old. How much do I want done to my body in this moment? And how much have I thought about that, felt the ramifications of that? How does that relate to my belief system, my experiences? How much have I communicated about that to my loved ones? Because many times in that decision, in that moment, the decision is that person's to make, but they're not making it in isolation. There's a family or there's a group, and they have to make that decision together. But one person often has thought about it a lot more, or perhaps has different experiences in life than the others. So how do you reconcile all those in that moment to decide how much do we do? What is our approach in the situation? So every situation is unique in that. The one that I wrote about in the book is when an elderly gentleman who had chronic illness, who had been to the emergency department many times over and over and over, had been through many treatment cycles, and now was at a point where he couldn't breathe, and the wife now had to make a decision. And she wasn't quite ready to make that decision, at least at the beginning of the process. And we talked a little bit and went through it and made some decisions, but that's a unique situation for every individual based on their experiences, their beliefs, their conversations. The most important thing I feel that can be applied to all such situations is giving that space and allowing people to sift through what they think and what they believe. Now, in the emergency department, often it can be seconds, it can be minutes to make such decisions. I find that when the space is there, if there truly is a space for those things to emerge, they will emerge rather quickly and spontaneously. So holding that space and honoring that space, respecting that space, valuing that space as much as you would value any answer that might come. It's not really about the answers so much. It's really about the process and allowing that place for all those minds to start dealing with or receiving all that information, all those thoughts, processing all those things. And then somehow spontaneously things seem to sift through and we make those decisions together.
That's neat. So do you see a huge difference between that moment when it's someone who has really thought it through versus someone who has not had that opportunity to think it through and process? So I remember a story of a friend who had mentioned during a residency, a young woman came in and presented with an overdose of, I don't know, was, Advil or Tylenol, and kind of didn't necessarily really mean it. It was more of a call for help. Yet the damage to the liver was so sincere that it caused a cascade that was going to result in the end of the patient. And so that was, that's someone I would assume that had not even really had those discussions and thoughts versus this example that you just spoke about. Help me understand how that looks, how those contrast, or if there's similarities.
What I found is that it's not so much about how much a person has thought about it, but more about how much they've experienced and what they've experienced in life.
Oh, okay.
This is what I've seen, because a person can think about what would it be like in that situation. Let's say I felt like I was at the end of my life and I was getting more sick and I was in an emergency situation where literally it could be minutes to hours, maybe days. What would I want done? Now, that's one thing to think about those things and to try to put yourself there. But it's quite different to be going through a process when you've experienced near-death situations, either from illness or from anything else. And especially if you've experienced them repeatedly, or people who have experienced helplessness, who have experienced trying everything and not being able to find an answer that works for them.
Mm-hmm.
For the people who have experienced these things over and over and over, it seems to me as if they have come closer and are living much closer to that edge. And so for them, the decisions seem to be more solid. They don't seem to waver as much. Now, it's not universal. It can change. But that's what I feel. The people who have had more experiences, who have been through more, who have been near that edge much more, they seem to be more at ease with their decision. Because for them, it's not an intellectual process. It's not about the thoughts. It's about what they're experiencing in real time.
Wow, that's interesting. So it was that was actually going to be one of my thoughts is, well, how about having those discussions with people ahead of time and before time? So I guess what you're saying is that's a good start, but nothing takes away the experience of life. So sort of like, you've watched videos, you've read all the instructions on how to surf, but until you're out there on the board and get dumped a few times, you just don't know.
Yeah. There's no substitute for experience. There's no substitute for experience. If you think about just in a broad sense, anything we learn, let's say when we go to school or when we go to work, anything we learn, we tend to do things by learning theory and then practicing the theory, applying the practice, right? Like riding a bicycle. Somebody said, get on the bike, pedal, you'll get some momentum, and then you'll kind of balance. And it almost sounds kind of magical. Like how in the world does that happen that you balance on two wheels? But as soon as you do it, you don't need the theory anymore. Like the experience replaces that theory because now you have that live experience. I think it's the same for life. Like there's some ways to live life. We're given a lot of theories in life. That's what science does. It creates a lot of theories that we live by. Religion does that too. Science and religion are different in the way science experiments with objective evidence. Religion also, in my opinion, requires experimentation. You have to experiment and see, is this working? Is what I'm experiencing changing? It can't remain at the level of belief. But as long as we remain at the level of belief, I believe this is what life is. I'm living life in this way. I've always been told that, I go to school and get my degree and then get married and have kids and get 2 cars and have a house and then I'll be happy. And then I'll retire and then I'll be happy, or I'll have enough money, whatever it is. I think if we continue to believe these things and not experiment with them and see what the deeper meaning, the deeper aspects of life are, then when we come to these situations like death, no amount of thinking is going to get us there. It has to be an experience of the deeper aspects of life. And when that experience is there, then some of these questions become easier because we're not living just at the outer layers of stories anymore, of thinking anymore. We're actually experiencing what it means to live, what might happen at the end of what we call a birth, what might happen at the time of transition. And then those decisions are easier because there's more recognition of the actual transitional nature of what's happening.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I can imagine that there's, for me, when I was a kid, my parents never hid death from me. I think I was at my first wake when I was 2. So, this is always a process of it. And my mom and dad's families were huge. So we were there. We were present for it. It was kind of worn out there. And I also watched how people worked well with or struggled with grief. And a lot of it is based upon beliefs, but the experience, at least you have some framework to be able to kind of to follow and to go through. So when you see folks at the at that situation where they've now just lost somebody, what do you find as some of the more beautiful examples of comforting, or things that really kind of gave them a feeling of comfort in their heart as a result?
3 main things. Number 1 is silence.
Yeah. Being present with it.
Just like we had right now, just for a couple seconds. There's a power in silence.
Sure is.
And when we honor that, when we recognize that, when anyone in the room recognizes that, the deeper aspects of our nature emerge. So it's one thing to have a human body, and it's another thing to be a human being.
So true. So true.
And we don't even have to articulate that in words, because once we put it in words, it gets a label like spirituality or religion or metaphysics or things like that. But instead, we can just leave all that to the side and allow silence.
Mm-hmm.
Because what is true will come up.
Absolutely.
It might not come up as thoughts or as words, but there will be a feeling. There is a love. There is caring. There is allowing. And then that again filters up, and the next thing will come. It might be a hug. It might be taking the person's hand. But the silence honors everything that has happened in the room. It honors everybody that is there and has been there. And it allows what has to happen next to happen. It's not my role as a physician to say what's going to happen next. My role is to do my best for the patient and for the family. And when we've done that in the form of medical care, then my role is to honor what's going to happen next, not to dictate that. So that begins with silence.
Yeah. That's beautiful. So silence first. You said 3.
Silence first. And then I think from there, next can be either a touch, it can be holding family's hand, it can be a hug. Depends on how comfortable they are, and how much physical space and distance they want. Or it can be words. I'm so sorry. Just 3 words. Or it can be more. But all of that happens next is still in the context of silence. Silence is still predominant. Even when words come, even when actions come, the silence is holding the moment. And I would even say this is not just valuable at the time of death, but for the entire process of a lifetime. In any moment, when we bring silence, something deeper happens. And in our society, you will see that silence is one of the things we are most uncomfortable with. There's always a need to fill the silence. Can we take 30 seconds of silence now?
Right.
So this is the context that we try to bring to the emergency department at the time of death.
That's beautiful. Um, it is a great thing to have that silence. I mean, I go back and reflect on, how I started all of this, which was death of my mom, death of my dad. My mom, her transition was due to burns. And so that moment when all of the machines were shut off and it was just silence, it was incredibly touching. A beautiful gift that happened for me was a nurse gave me the poem "The Dash," and I thought that was extremely touching. With my dad, the nurses at the hospice were with me, and again, it's an amazing thing to observe. I mean, I think it's to me, it's like a miracle. I think in its own special way, because it's that moment where you really understand how much, for me, the soul animated the body, and that understanding of matter and energy can't be created or destroyed. They're just interchangeable, right? So you literally watch that moment when matter becomes energy. And it's so incredibly profound. I was allowed to sit with my dad, after by myself. And that was just so comforting. It also allowed me time to have a conversation with my sister, with him in the room. It was very, very transformative. It was probably one of the most beautiful experiences. And my goal in doing what I'm doing is to drive my sales so that 10% of everything that I do is designated towards hospice and creating greater access to hospice. And when you talk about silence, that was probably the biggest change that I noticed from moving from the hospital or the rehab environment to hospice, right? The urgency drops. The quietness fills the air. The reverence rises, right? The reflections rise. And at first that's a little, it's a little disorienting, but then at the same time, it winds up being such an incredible comfort, because I think it allows you that space and time for reflection, because it is so quiet, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. What hospice can do, when hospice is done well, what it can do is it can bring the process of death into your life,
Mm-hmm.
into life. It brings it within life. In the hospital, in an acute care setting, death and life are opposed. Death is always being pushed away.
Right.
So there's this resistance of something that's happening. We're all living and we're all dying right now. Like I said, there are cells that are regenerating and there are cells that are dying. It's happening in every moment throughout our body. So dying and living are co-processes. They're the same process seen from different aspects. And that's happening for everyone. Even for a newborn baby, it's happening for everyone right now. And so, to push it away creates some kind of split within ourselves. It creates kind of a shadow area that I don't really know what's happening. I'm not really aware of that part. I have no access to the part. It's scary. It becomes like this part that I don't want to know anything about. Whereas what hospice can do is it can bring that part that's kind of been rejected and pushed away, and it can be brought within ourselves. Now, I would say that, and there's a healing in that, right? Because that split, that schism, that pushing away is now brought within ourselves, instead of trying to keep it split. Now, I would say that we don't have to wait for hospice for this to happen,
Right.
And understanding about death, I think it should be part of school. I think it should be part of, just like sex education is a part of school. Why? Because sex is an essential part of life. There is no life without sex. Similarly, there's no life without death. And so, we don't have to take a religious perspective on it. I'm not saying we should teach religion, but we can teach looking into our own minds. We can teach self-awareness practices through which everyone in their own way will reach these deeper questions and examine them on their own.
Yeah. Yep. Nope. I totally agree with you. And I think there's so many vehicles that are already out there that are offered to people to begin to look at that. I mean, before I began my journey with this, I never heard of a thing called the Death Cafe or Death Dialogues or, all that. And, all of a sudden it's like, and it's funny because, I don't know that I ever imagined myself getting into a position where it'd be, being an advocate for embracing this, but I think it's an advocate for embracing life.
Yeah.
And this is really what the message and the decisions are about. And that fear really can transmute itself very quickly into that the cherishing of life, of which death is a part, right? So it's just part of that. So any other little pieces of words of wisdom or key advice you'd like to share?
I would say that a self-awareness practice, some kind of practice to look into our own minds, to look into what it is that makes us tick, what it is that allows us to see the world and experience the world as we do. Any kind of practice that moves in that direction is such an important tool in life. It's that kind of practice that helps us navigate the times that are difficult, whether it's the death of a loved one, whether it's a disease process, whether it's even tough financial times, whether it's the stress of an argument, even an argument that's 2 minutes long that causes stress. All of these are addressed by some kind of awareness practice to recognize what it is within ourselves that helps us see the world the way we do. And so I want to put a plug in for that. And that can be anything that works for you, anything that works for anyone. But that can literally change the way we see ourselves, literally change how we see ourselves. That I saw myself as a body, but now I see myself differently, perhaps. It can change the way we see the world. So what I saw before is this laptop in front of me and Anne sitting in front of me. But right now, the field of vision has expanded and changed so much that that's not exactly what I recognize. That might be one way I describe it. And not only it changes the way we experience ourselves and experience the world, but obviously then it changes our quality of life and our moment-to-moment experience of what we call life. I mean, this is a radical kind of shift in perspective that we're talking about, right? This isn't just, I want to be less stressed, or, I want to get the answer to this question. That's fantastic. And yes, that's also part of it. But we're talking about a fundamental change in the way we experience ourselves, the experience of the world, and experience the moment-to-moment depth of life. So I would encourage anyone to start looking into these things and see what it does.
Yeah. So when you talk about that, is it meditation? Is it actually maybe just as simple as holding a space of silence for yourself? I mean, it's kind of almost that way to start, right? Just like we did 30 seconds. I mean, just think if you did that before you responded when you were really anxious, driven by anything, right?
Yes, it's meditation, it's silence, it's anything that calls to any person, right? Because meditation and silence are words we give to aspects of whatever it is that we recognize. So we recognize in relation to words and sounds and a whole bunch of thoughts running around, it's called silence, right? In relation to being unfocused perhaps, or being caught up in a whole bunch of things, it's called meditation. But we can't say that meditation is what it is or silence is what it is. That's just ways of describing it. So I would say whatever it is that appeals to people, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's meditation, whether it's silence, whether it's going for a walk, whether it's feeling your body, whether it's rubbing your hands together and just feeling the simple pleasure of what that feels like. Anything that takes us deeper into our experience.
Right.
Because, like when you look at a tree looks huge and it's got all this, the trunk and its branches and all this. But if you go beneath the soil, the roots are spread vast.
Expansive.
And the exact same is true for our experience of ourselves and our experience of the world. The world is vast and it's infinite. And there's so many forms and sounds and so much going on. And yet, when we access the deeper part of it, we see a vast root system that in a way, dwarfs what's on the outer level. And so recognizing that shifts the perspective on what we're looking at. Just like when we look at a tree, we can recognize its beauty and its power. But if we could look beneath the ground and see the entire root network, we would just be blown away. Wow, this is something much more than I imagined. And the same is true of us.
Ah, that's beautiful. I remember being in Austin one time and on a little boat cruise, and there was actually an entire tree that was, suspended up above the water so that you could see the entire thing. And when you mentioned that, that just came right to my mind, and it's just stunning, right? It's just, you look at that and you're like, you marvel, how could that possibly be?
Exactly.
So some of the things that I love that I'm seeing too are, just these kind of, I think, really entry point ways of bringing this to more of a conscious dialogue. Like on Facebook, there's those gratitude things. Someone is saying, post something for 50 days straight. Another one is saying, for 21 days straight, put up 3 things that you're grateful for every day. And it could be so simple as the smile that I got when somebody handed me my cup of coffee. It could be, the snowflake that fell on my jacket that was so incredibly perfect. You just begin to wonder. Things like that are so simple. It doesn't have to be so big. There's such a low entry point for this. Like you said, even just, that feeling of, the numbness or the heat that happens, just really being aware. So taking your presence and maybe turning it inward.
And I think how easy it is and simple it is deceptive, because people often equate that it's so easy, such a low entry point, it can't really be that valuable. It really can't have that many results. But that's where the whole thinking gets inverted. It's so simple and accessible simply because it's so ubiquitous and it touches absolutely everything. So you can literally access and enter anywhere, and then it just keeps opening up from there.
Yeah. For me, one of my favorites is I take pictures like I'm a tourist around my yard, like the flowers, the trees, the leaves, the grass, the shamrocks. I mean, anything, right? Just, and those times when I get a little keyed up, I just go through my phone like, oh man, look at all this beauty. And it's just, it's just so simple. And it's, it just kind of returns yourself to a place of your heart. You come to a different space, it reminds you to just, open up a bit. Look at the beauty. So, well, I got to thank you so much. This is an awesome discussion. I could talk to you for, I think, days. I look forward to doing that again sometime soon, though. And so is there anything that you'd like to offer to our viewers about how they can connect with you? I've mentioned the book, but I'd love you to talk a little bit more about that in other ways as well.
Sure. The best way is my website, anoopkumar.com. And there's a link to the book there. I have a second book coming out this summer that will also be available. That's a little bit more, that's going to be called Is This a Dream? And it kind of looks at the deeper nature of reality and how we can connect the version of reality, the story of reality that we all learned in school, and how that connects with a deeper picture without invalidating one or the other. They're both valid. They're both different perspectives that we can see. So how can we integrate them? That's what that book is about. And I'm on Twitter at Dr. Anoop Kumar. But the best way is through the website. You can contact me through there, and we can go from there.
Okay, great. Well, I'll make sure that all of that's below our video as links to the video as well. So thank you very much, Anoop. And thank you very much for joining us today on Comforting Hearts Conversations, where we take on a tough subject and break it down for you so that you can navigate your own path through loss and grief. So thanks again so much to all, and to you, Anoop, especially, and sending love from our hearts to yours. Thanks so much.